Hi, hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Truthful Ministry podcast. Today, we're going to be going over the fourth message that Cody and I gave at the fall retreat. We kind of went back and forth. I gave the first one, Cody gave the second one, I gave the third one, Cody gave the fourth one. So today, we're going over that fourth and final message. If you haven't been following along, you should really go back and listen to those last three because they all tied together. Like God kind of worked well, even though Cody and I didn't necessarily fully plan on, making our sermons super cohesive. We basically just kind of gave each other the broad ideas and the titles, and then God still used it in just an amazing way where all of our sermons really did tie together really well. And so what we're going to do is just kind of go over Cody's fourth message and the things that he said in it, the things that kind of spoke to him the most, and that he was really excited to teach. We'll just kind of go back and forth talking about that. So
yeah, before we get into that, I'm curious, Johnny, when you think about watching movies or watching TV shows or reading books, do you have a favorite story that comes to mind? And in particular, a story with like a hero as the protagonist. I don't want I'm not talking about like a romance story or something, but like kind of a heroic story. What's your go-to there?
Oh my gosh, that's so tough. Honestly, I think one thing that comes to my mind is like the Spider-Verse movies, not like the Tom Holland ones. Like those are all good too. Like all the Spider-Man movies are good, but the animated ones like Miles Morales.
Yeah, the Into the Spider-Verse.
I really do like how they do a great job of him just sort of being like an innocent like teenager, which is what Spider-Man's kind of supposed to be. But he's called into this like greater multiversal scheme, and he has to kind of like power up and find himself a little bit. And it's almost like an identity thing for him of like, who is he? And there's all these other Spider-Mans, but like he's the Spider-Man that's different. And I think that's a really good example. And the second movie too, at the beginning, really shows like a follow-up. I'm like, well, what's it like now that he is a hero? And it shows him. I don't know if you've seen it.
I haven't seen the second one.
I won't spoil too much for you then, but it just kind of like does a flyby of like, he's been Spider-Man for a while now. What's it been like? And there's points where it's like, he did this really funny thing, and he did this thing, and then he did this, and now people think of him like this. And it's a good little wrap-up of how it was in between the movies of like, hey, he was Spider-Man for a while, just swinging around saving people, what that was like.
Nice.
So I guess that would be the first one that comes to mind.
Yeah, the one that comes to mind to me as an example here is Lord of the Rings. Probably the best movie trilogy ever made. It'll never get topped. Don't at me. It's the best one. And in the book, I went back and read the books way after I ever saw the movies. But you see this in the movies, but you get it better in the books how much of a hero Frodo actually is. In the movies, he's kind of painted almost as this like reluctant, like, doesn't really want to be there almost. And that's there, but like, in the books, Frodo is a hero. Like he's more so than in the movies. And I think one of the interesting things with heroic stories is every good hero has that like, there's an initial reluctance almost to go into it, right? They have their comfortable life the way they are, and there's something that prompts them to make a choice. Am I going to go and be a hero, or am I going to hide in my shell and hope somebody else steps up, right? I don't remember, what is it with the Miles Morales story? He has some kind of moment towards the beginning where it's like, he's got his normal life or whatever, and the moment I guess would be when he gets his powers, and he has the choice there. Am I going to actually use my powers, or am I going to not do that and just try to fit in as a normal teenager? And with Frodo, he has that moment where Gandalf figures out that the ring that Bilbo left him is this evil ring. It's Sauron's ring, and it has to be destroyed. And Frodo has to choose: am I going to actually carry it, or am I going to refuse to do that and stay here in the Shire and live my little hobbit life? And this was kind of for the message. This was my opening kind of idea, was this concept known as the hero's journey. Talk about Joseph Campbell. In 1949, he released this book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And it's been really influential on the way people think about stories. And we didn't get into the entire hero's journey thing, but a basic summary of the hero's journey is: a hero ventures forth from a world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. And I wanted to look at, with the message, kind of that initial step that every good hero story has, this call to adventure, and they're initially unsure whether or not to go, and they have to come to a place towards the beginning of the story of, I'm going to go and be a hero. I have to make a choice. Luke Skywalker is initially reluctant to leave his aunt and uncle. Tony Stark doesn't think he's good enough to be a hero. Harry Potter, initially afraid when Hagrid comes to take him to Hogwarts. Frodo is, initially like, I'm just a hobbit. Like, I don't, this is too big for me.
I'm much more, I like the Hobbit movies way more than Lord of the Rings.
Are you for real?
Yeah. I feel like we've talked about it before, but just because, again, I'm someone who hasn't read the books, and the Hobbit is way more like, it's like more modern-y, CGI'd, and so I think of that a lot with Bilbo from the Hobbit. He literally doesn't go with them at first in the movies. Like, he stays behind, and then later he like gets that sense of adventure and runs up and decides to go with them at the last minute. Yeah, but he straight up is like, he's straight up like, no, I don't want to go. Like, this, I'm a hobbit, I'm comfortable, I'm not going. And he doesn't go, and it's not until later that he runs and has to catch up with them. And they're like,
I'm going on an adventure.
Yeah.
Yeah. The books are good. The Hobbit book is good. The movies have their moments.
Yeah.
The first one I liked fine, but more than Lord of the Rings.
The Lord of the Rings, I just wasn't. It was so slow, man. The movies were so slow. It felt like I was watching a snooze fest.
Time to grow up.
None of these people matter.
Man, I thought we were friends, but
it's gonna be a whole other podcast episode.
Yeah, we're gonna have to have an intervention there. I don't know if I've ever heard anybody say that, but anyway, with every hero story, there's a moment where there's a crossing of the threshold where there's no going back. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. Luke Skywalker's aunt and uncle, he comes back from hanging out with old Ben, and they're murdered by Imperial stormtroopers. And now the decision is kind of made for. Like, there's no going back at this point. Tony Stark is forced to build the Mark I Iron Man suit because he gets kidnapped. And it's like, either he does this or he dies. And so, Harry Potter is compelled to go to Hogwarts after Hagrid breaks into the Dursley house. Frodo has this moment after he brings the ring to Rivendell, to the elves, and they're like, we have to take it to Mount Doom, and it has to be thrown in. Who's going to take it? And they're all arguing about it, and Frodo has this moment of like, it's got to be me, doesn't it? And he's like, I'll bear the ring to Mordor. And once that's said, you can even see it in Gandalf's face in the scene in the movie where Gandalf, his face just falls, and he knows what Frodo just signed up for. And Frodo doesn't even fully understand what he just signed up for, but it's the moment. That's really the moment where Frodo is on this journey. And for us as Christians, we have that kind of moment as well, right? We have a moment of decision when we are faced with the gospel, where we have to choose: am I going to follow God? Am I going to deny myself and take up my cross and follow him? Or am I going to stay where I'm at, even though I know something has to change? Am I going to stubbornly refuse to walk down this narrow path? Even if it's going to lead to death. Like Frodo, someone has to take the ring. He has to take the ring. Like, I can't stay in the Shire, because otherwise Sauron's minions are going to come and burn the Shire down and kill everybody, right? It doesn't make sense for Frodo to stay, but there's a sense in which we can empathize with him. Like, I don't want to do this. I'm comfortable where I'm at. It's like, well, there's moments in our life where like we talked about last time, you can't just, the change is coming whether you like it or not. And so as Christians, we face this moment where Jesus is calling us to follow him, and we make that initial step on the journey. There's no turning back. Once Once you go and follow Christ, as he's called us to go, we're on the journey. But one of the other steps in the hero's journey that's key to the story, and this is what makes a good story, is there's roadblocks on the path, right? And those roadblocks represent these challenges to the resolve of the hero, right? You have, again, in the books, this isn't in the movie, but there's this moment in the books, like not long after he leaves the Shire, where Frodo goes through like this giant, like, ancient graveyard, and there's these barrow wights, which are like undead monsters or whatever, and he's hiding from the barrow wights, and he's like, I shouldn't have left the Shire, like, I'm not good enough,
right?
But he has to overcome that and keep going. And there's several moments throughout the story where he's faced with this opposition, he's faced with this obstacle. The Balrog comes when they're going through Moria, and his mentor, his guide, Gandalf, dies, and so that he can keep going. And there's all these moments where he's faced with both it's a test of his resolve, but it's also an opportunity for him to give up. And what makes him a hero is that he doesn't, that he keeps going. And so I kind of shared that Jesus is the ultimate hero of the story, right? Jesus is the one, he's the protagonist of history. But we as Christians, we're invited into Jesus' story, and we get to kind of partake with him. We have our own little moments of where we get to be united with Christ in being heroes on this journey that we're on. And we are united with him in that. And so we too will face these moments where our resolve to continue going and follow Jesus is tested. And there's lots of Christians that they face those and they give up. And we have to ask, is that going to happen to us? So we were in Daniel 3. I'll read some of Daniel 3 here. I read the whole chapter with the youth, but we're not going to read the whole chapter here because that would be like the whole podcast, basically.
Yeah.
But, John, are there any moments that you can think of in your walk with Christ where you can remember, like, being tempted, like, this is just too much, and maybe I should just give up, maybe I should quit?
Oh, 100%. I always say, like, spring 2019, just like I can go right to the day. I was at my first, what I considered big ministry job in a way. It was an internship, but it was like the first internship where I was working directly under the youth minister, and he was like letting me preach a lot, and I was getting to like participate, and I don't know, it was just and it was a bigger church too. I had worked at other churches and I'd been interning and doing other things, but it in my eyes was like my first real big important job at a church. I was working there, I was playing soccer, I was trying to start FCA, I was doing other campus ministries things, and so on my Wednesdays, for example, I would wake up and I would go straight to class. I'd go straight from class to chapel at Kentucky Wesleyan, and some days I had to like literally preach at chapel because the main speaker couldn't be there, and I would be told like last minute, like, hey, can you preach? And so I'd participated at chapel in certain ways and volunteered, and then I'd go straight from chapel to get food, and then I'd go from getting food to the church that I worked at because he wanted me to get there early and start setting up. I'd set up the slides, I'd set up the chairs, I'd like preach and or do whatever for youth, and I'd be like super energetic, because it's like you're working with middle schoolers and high schoolers, so I'd be super energetic, and then I'd go from there. It'd be like 9 p.m. straight to the gym at our school, and I'd put on my shoes, and we'd do soccer practice, and then I'd get home and it would be like 10:30, 11, and I'd just be exhausted, and I'd be like, I didn't get to do anything today. Like I didn't get to work on my schoolwork. I didn't get to I was just going the whole time, and I was so anxious for that period of my life because it felt like I was just always on the go, and I genuinely struggled with. I went on a mission trip thinking, all right, I'm just gonna go on a mission trip, and then no one can tell me that I have anything to do. I'm not gonna have any responsibilities because it's like I'm serving the Lord. And then yet I still felt all this anxiety because I thought, well, now that I'm gone for a week, I'm gonna get back and be a week behind. And now I've got people texting me like, hey, we know you're not here, but like, can you help us with this? Did you do this? Did you remember to do that? Like, what are you gonna do when you get back? And all of this stuff, and also it was just in my own mind. I was just thinking like, I can't do this. Like, I'm not good enough. Like, I don't know how people do it with these schedules, because I know that I'm not the busiest person ever, but like I'm pretty busy right now, and I already feel like I'm just gonna have to fold. Like, I feel like I can't do it. I'm gonna have to say like, hey everybody, I'm sorry, but like I'm about to quit like everything I'm doing because I just can't handle it, and I'm gonna have to reevaluate like what I'm even called to do, because I can't handle being in ministry and being in class and being in a sport and having to have a job, like all this different stuff. It was just genuinely too much for me, and thankfully I had put myself on that mission trip, and even though I was hoping like, oh, I would get away from the anxieties, I was on it with the right people, with the right church people who loved on me, and I got to work with them, and our amazing campus ministries director who like maybe not saved my life in a literal sense, but like saved my like spiritual life in a sense, on that trip, because he was able to just pour into me when I like for the first time went to him and was just like genuinely in tears and was like, dude, like I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Like I was like, man, how do you do it? Because like you're someone who I look up to and you're in ministry, but I was like, it feels like there's not enough time in the day. How am I supposed to do all these things that God wants me to do? And how come some of them feel hard and some of them feel easy? And I don't know. I just kind of poured my heart out and was like, how do you do it? And he got a little teary-eyed too, and he was like, hey, it's always going to feel like there's not enough time in the day. Like the older you get, like it's never going to be perfect. And I won't share everything because it'd be its own whole podcast, but just some of the words of encouragement he gave me and like the scripture he used, and we had like the most genuine, like heartfelt conversation I've ever had. And it worked so well too that like some of my struggles were ministry related because I wanted to be in ministry and I felt like it was a lot. And he was someone who was in ministry and was further down the line in life. Like, and I genuinely walked away from that trip with like a new spur of energy, like a second wind of like, God's calling me to do all this. And there was some like reevaluating of like time management and things like that I had to do. But at the same time, I walked away from that trip just so encouraged and refreshed. But that was for sure like a somewhat dark time for me because I just felt so much on my plate.
Yeah. Yeah, these trials that we face, and we will face them, trials of faith, trials of various kinds, we should expect to face them as Christians. Mm-hmm. We're either going to face external trials where it's something outside of us that's, threatening us to conform or to give up. Sometimes it's an internal, just like, I just don't know if I've got it, right? Yeah. And I picture, again, I know you don't care for the Lord of the Rings movies, but at the end of Return of the King, the third film in the series, right? Frodo is climbing, he's in Mordor. He's climbing the mountain to get up to the volcano, and he's just like completely and utterly drained. And he just can't make it on his own. He just can't do it. Sometimes we're there and we don't have the energy to keep going. To kind of spoil it a little bit, God enters into those moments and he gives us just what we need in those moments where we're right on the brink, when we're right on the edge and we cry out to him for help, right? Sam goes up to Frodo and the famous line, he's like, I may not be able to carry it for you, but I can carry you. And he picks up Frodo and carries him up the rest of the way. You talked about, right on the brink, you had that person that you had the heart-to-heart with that gave you just that little push that you needed to get back on your feet. That's how God works. And we were in Daniel 3 with, in the scriptures with the message. And I'll just read part of it, but this is the story of the fiery furnace. It's a pretty popular one for children's church stories. If you went to children's church, you almost certainly know it. But Daniel 3 is this powerful story of these three Israelite like young men who have, this is after they've been taken into exile, and they're in the city of Babylon, and they're in the heart of the enemy empire. They've been captured, and there's this pressure all around them to try to conform, to give up on their faith in Yahweh, to stop following him, but instead become a Babylonian. They even give them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego aren't their original names. That's their new Babylonian names that they're forced to take. And anyway, so at this point in the story, in chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar, who is the king, sets up this giant statue of himself, and commands everybody in the kingdom to bow down and worship it. And anybody that doesn't, there's this furnace, this fiery furnace that he builds into the base of the statue. And he's like, if you don't bow down and worship my statue of me, I'm going to throw you into the furnace and sacrifice you to myself. And long story short, there's a bunch of people that are kind of jealous of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they tattletale on them to the king because these three men, they refuse to bow down because they follow God. Mm-hmm. Like, I can't bow down and worship this idol. And so Nebuchadnezzar confronts them. And so picking up in verse 13 of chapter 3, it says, Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Is it true that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? And this is a moment that we all face in small ways. Sometimes we face it in this way, right? Mm-hmm. There are Christians in the world that face that, there's a gun pointed at your head and it's, stomp out this portrait of Christ or we're going to shoot you. That happens. But for most of us, we're probably not in that context. We have smaller ways where the world does this to us, where, we might lose opportunities at work if we stand up for our faith. Where I was talking to my mom about this just a couple days ago. Whenever I was like 18, 19, I was living with my mom at the time, and still I hadn't moved out yet. And she worked as a waitress at the country club in the town we were in, and so she got me a job working as a dishwasher there. And the one thing I told them when they hired me on was, like, I can work Friday nights, I'll work Saturdays, but I'm a committed Christian. I need Sunday mornings off, and I do Wednesday nights. And I was like, if you can give me those, I'll work whatever else you need me to do. And typically, you work in a service industry job, you work in a restaurant, having an employee be like, I'll work all the Saturdays you want me to work. Yeah. Typically, that works pretty good. And it was like that for a couple months maybe, but then they started scheduling me on Sunday mornings. And they did this a couple of times. And it wasn't like it was some important day or whatever, or there was some emergency. They just scheduled me. And I went and talked to my boss, and I was like, hey, look, I told you when you were interviewing me, I can't do Sunday mornings. It's like, I really can't do them. Like, I meant it. And he's like, okay, yeah. And then, he gave me a couple of weeks where I didn't have Sundays, but then the schedule comes out, and I had a few more Sundays in a row. And I went to him, and I had this, it's that kind of stuff that we tend to face, of just, like, these little, like, pressures of, like, you're going to have to, like, what are you going to do? Like, I'm going to fire you. Like, you don't have control of when your schedule is going to be. And it was easy for me to stand up in that moment and be like, if you're going to fire me, I guess. But I didn't have really much bills to pay or anything. Like, I was living with my mom. That's a lot more of a threat when you're, married, have multiple kids that you got to take care of. Like, and that's a real threat that people face. Stuff like that. And so we can kind of relate to Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego here. Just picture those moments in your life where you've been forced to, where someone's tried to force you to give in, to compromise your faith, to make those, just to sacrifice Christ on the idol of this pagan world, right? Whatever it looks like, the idol of work or whatever. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego give us a good response in those moments to follow after. They say, picking up in verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. Just imagine just the guts of just like, you're standing before the king, like the most powerful man in the world. And he's like, I'm going to kill you if you don't bow down and worship. And you're surrounded by these thousands of people who have all already done this. Mm-hmm. Just the pressure to conform. And they're like, we don't even need to answer you.
Yeah.
That takes some guts, first of all. They say, if this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. There's this confidence that God will deliver us. No matter what happens, even if you kill us. It's not expressly stated, but there's this idea here. It's like, we might die. Right? Yeah. They say this here, but if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you've set up. They can't know what's going to happen next. How can they have confidence in the deliverance? It's like, well, either God delivers us through the fire and we don't die, or we are going to die and God delivers us anyway, and we get to go be with him.
Boom.
It's like, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Right? That's why they can look at him and say, I don't have to answer you, because you might be king over Babylon, but I serve a greater king, and he's bigger than you.
Yeah.
Right.
My dad could beat up your dad.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, what do we have to fear? So, I guess with that, have you experienced any moments, Johnny, where, like, you've been kind of, like I shared with, like, the dishwashing job, but, like, have you ever had any moments like that where you felt like the world's trying to tell you, you need to act this way, or you need to get in line, or there'll be consequences?
I can't really think of too many. I definitely think, like, being an athlete in college, like, I mean, the pressure to conform is real. Mm-hmm. Like, you're in the locker room and things are happening and people are saying things, and just in general, like, through most of my college experience, there were all sorts of moments where everyone around me was doing something, and it never felt like something that was, like, massive or, like, a big deal, you know? I talked about in my message with the thief who comes to steal and destroy versus the hired hand, and how sometimes as Christians it can be easier for us to say, like, well, I don't do drugs, or, like, I don't kill people, so I'm good, like,
right,
that kind of thing. So it wasn't even necessarily stuff like that, but like you said, it was like the little things, like how men talked about women, and it's like, am I gonna just kind of join on that? Am I gonna laugh at that and joke about it too, or just, it was a lot of little stuff like that where there was always minor pressures. Where, looking back, if you took that snippet of me in that moment and how I acted, it's like, would I necessarily be representing a Christian? And sometimes I probably failed, and sometimes I probably did well. But it's those little snippets of, like, hey, in this moment, how are people going to look at me? Are they going to recognize, like, oh, that's a man of God, or am I going to fit in with all the other, you know, stuff that's not of God right now? Like, what am I going to choose to do in this moment? And so, yeah, it was a lot of little stuff for sure, just those pressures.
Yeah, and that's typically what we face. Like, you might have one or two moments in your life, maybe, where you have this dramatic moment. And I talk about this in the message of, like, we can picture ourselves in those moments, right? Because we watch all these movies all the time, and these TV shows, and we read books about this hero facing down the villain and standing firm, right? And in a sense, that's easier to do than refusing to compromise on the small things, because we don't think much of the small things, right? And the difference there is we mentally sort of prepare ourselves when we watch these movies and stuff. We're like, if I was in that situation, well, that's what I would do, you know, right? You're watching, you know, a movie and someone stands up, like, in a bank robbery and, like, tackles the guy, and, like, I don't know if you're like this. I feel like this, like, the male impulse of just, like,
100%.
I sit around, like, I do this sometimes. I used to do this more when I was younger, a bit more disciplined now. But, like, I'd be at church, and I'd be like,
100%. Yep.
So someone breaks in with a gun at this church, like this. I'd be getting up there and be like, listen, brother, I don't know why you're here.
Yeah.
like have this moment.
I had that same thought.
Or, like, tackle the guy or whatever. And for some reason, the big things are easier to handle, and I think the reason is because we just spend time thinking about them because they're kind of exciting. But how often do we spend time mentally preparing for the little things, the little compromises? And I did share, like, a lot of the stuff you said of, like, you know, you're sitting around with your friends and your friends are making jokes that, you know, you're not really supposed to be laughing at. Like, what do you do? What's the big deal? You know, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, what do you do in that situation? You know, it's when you're caught off guard by it. your friends are gossiping about someone behind that, and you're not supposed to be gossiping. Like, do you stand up? Right? Is it enough to simply not participate, or should we stand up for that person? You're alone in your room at night, and you're private. No one's gonna come in. Like, that's when the devil's gonna whisper in your ear and be like, go look at this website. No one's gonna catch you. The only way to be prepared in those moments is to prepare beforehand, right? We have, this is chapter 3 of the story. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We've already read stories where they faced this opposition. They know it's coming, and they've had smaller moments before. There's a story in chapter 1 where they're forced to, their captors have just captured them, and they've changed their name, and they've changed their clothes, and they've taken them to a new place to live, and they're like, all right, we're going to change even what you're eating. If you know anything about the Jewish faith, like, they had strict dietary laws, and they're like, this is enough, like, this is the line. And they're like, you want us to eat food that we can't eat, we're not. So they know the pressure is coming, and so they've had to mentally prepare themselves before chapter 3 comes, of saying, if they put me to the fire, what am I going to do when that day comes? Like, surely they've thought about this, they've talked about it together, they've prayed through it.
I love the way it's worded. Is it says Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego responded. It doesn't say like Meshach and Abednego were a little bit nervous, but Shadrach stood up and spoke for the group.
Yeah, and the other ones were like,
wait, hold on. Yeah, it says like they responded as a group. Like, I don't think they literally, like, in a Triforce moment all spoke at the exact same time, but it was like, we know they were on the same page. Like, they were on the same page. Like, the group decided, hey, this is where we're at. Like, they were all on the same page, and that type of same pageness comes from prior discussion and, like, accountability and pressure and thinking ahead to be like, hey, if this happens, like, we hear these rumors about what's going on with Nebuchadnezzar, if this happens to us, are we on the same page? And they're like, yeah. It wasn't like hold on, they all had to retreat and they thought about it, or one person stepped up. It says Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, like, this is their group saying, as a 3-man posse, like, here's where we're at. We're standing our ground.
And it's easier to stand because they stood together.
Right.
That's a big point too. But again, to say it, to repeat myself, we don't do this well with the small stuff. Especially, like, this was messages for youth. Youth are bad about this. They're prepared for the big challenges. It's the small challenges, the small compromises that they make, and those add up. That's what kills you, right? The devil tends to get us not with, one big attack. It's death by 1,000 cuts, 1,000 little compromises, and you look up one day and realize you've taken 1,000 little baby steps off the path, but 1,000 baby steps is enough to get you lost in the forest. And so we have to commit ourselves. This is one of the reasons why spending time daily in the Word and routinely participating in church is important, because it's compelling us to be regularly thinking about and considering, what would I do when this moment comes? God, help me to be like this, in this way that you've called me to live, right? We read in the Gospels about, turn the other cheek. Someone strikes you, turn the other cheek. Right? When we're just doing our daily reading, we are not like, I don't read that and be like, all right, someone's going to punch me in the face today.
Yeah.
All right. But, like, there is a degree to which I read that and I'm like, God, when something comes against me, help me to not seek my own vengeance. Yeah. Like, and I might even think, like, genuinely, like, what are some scenarios that are likely to happen? I don't necessarily expect someone just to come up and just punch me in the face.
Yeah.
In my day-to-day life. But I do sometimes expect, like, working with teenagers can be mean sometimes. They don't have very good filters all the time. And they say things sometimes that can really hurt your feelings, and they don't even realize that they've been mean. And it's like, in that moment, God, when they say that thing, help me to, be the bigger person and to just forgive and turn the other cheek. And we have to do this. I think the way I put it is that you have to decide what you will do when the pressure to choose Christ or the world comes, long before you ever have to face the choice. You have to be prepared beforehand, because we're bent towards sin. So if we're not prepared for that moment, we're more likely to make the wrong choice than the right choice. So we're fighting an uphill battle here against ourselves, against our own inclinations. And God gives us these smaller moments. They're opportunities to be prepared when the big things come. They had the strength of faith to stand and throw what Nebuchadnezzar said back at them, because their faith had been forged into steel through the crucible of life's little moments. And that God gives us that too. He gives the same thing to us. So we have to make that choice well beforehand. Be meditating. Make the decision. Make the commitment. One of the examples I gave was marriage vows. For better, for worse, for richer, for poor, in sickness and in health, to love and cherish till death do us part. We make those promises at the beginning of the marriage, right? We don't, just be like, all right, we're going to live together and, not think about we're just going to pretend like things aren't going to go bad.
Yeah.
We're going to pretend like everything's going to go easy and smoothly. Like, no, things are going to go bad. You don't know exactly how it's going to go bad, but stuff's going to be rough. So you're committing at the get-go. Whatever happens, we're sticking it out.
Yeah.
And it's those vows that make the marriage strong. And it's commitment to those vows that make the marriage strong. And so we have to, as Christians, commit when the going gets tough. Am I going to stick with Christ or not? And make that commitment and stick to it. That's pretty well my thoughts here. Do you have any comments or anything on with that?
I think about for people who are out there listening to this, like ways that you can prepare in a way are just one, like accountability. Like we said, it wasn't just Shadrach, it wasn't just Meshach, it was like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Like they were able to stick together, and maybe getting out of your comfort zone a little bit if you're not a super social person, and just being willing to find other like-minded believers to discuss with and pray with, or have them pray for you, because there's a lot of potential. Like, I'm going to use this verse in a different sense than it's 100% intended, but I think the logic applies here, of like Luke 10:2, and it says the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few, right? Mm-hmm. In the same sense, Jesus, what he's really talking about there is like, man, if you would go out and do ministry, the amount of people who like would come to the kingdom of God, like the harvest you would get from going out and trying to get people to believe it. There's so many, but not a lot of people are willing to go out there and do ministry, or not a lot of people are willing to go out and go to these places that like might be out of their comfort zone to go and do ministry. In that same sense, I would just encourage people to say, like, man, there are so many Christians out there that are probably just like you, looking for a community. Like, there's so many out there, but the amount of people who are willing to go out and find them and connect them is pretty low. But like, if you just go out there and do it, like, accountability is huge. And then the other thing is like just genuinely keeping up your own like private time and faith. Like, I can think of times in my life where genuinely, I just genuinely feel like I was able to like say something that was helpful to someone in a ministry sense, or say something to it in a way defend my faith that I didn't necessarily literally think to myself, like, what if someone asked me this question? But it was more so just like, I've spent enough time just kind of building my relationship with God, enough time just kind of like studying the Word and thinking about, what I believe, that when this situation arose, the Spirit was able to move through me in a way. Like, there's a verse somewhere that talks about like God not being a God of chaos, like he's like a God of order. And so in a sense, like when you have your faith, and this, I feel like this will make sense. Like when you have your faith more like organized, like when you have your faith in a more routine, and you're more, regularly in your faith and thinking about it, like that's when you're allowing the Spirit to move through you more. And so I just think of, in my life specifically, one moment where I was in a group of people where the spotlight was kind of on me, and I was asked a question that was somewhat targeted like at the faith in general. And people were like, dude, like, how did you knew to say that? That was an amazing answer you gave. And I was literally like, I don't even know what I just said almost. Like I was literally so nervous, but I just thought, like, how'd you say it? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I didn't prepare for her to ask me that question, but I knew scripture in general. So like when she asked me that question, I was like, okay, well, what am I going to say? Like, well, first thing that comes to my mind is this. And I read a verse, and I was like, here are my thoughts on it. And that's what it is. And just being able to be in that spot. And I think of there's a verse in Matthew 10 where Jesus is sitting out the apostles, and he literally says, like, don't worry about what to say when you're asked, because like the Holy Spirit will say something for you.
I was just thinking about that same
And then
verse.
literally in Acts 4, this is how I read Scripture. I read it like a movie, like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. How it's like, oh, do you remember from in this Doctor Strange movie they referenced what happened in that Hulk movie that one time, and then the Iron Man movie they referenced, dude, do you remember what they referenced in season 3? Like, it's just like that. It's like so cool because you hear Jesus say that in Matthew 10, and then later in Acts 4, what happens? It says that Peter and John are like in the process of being arrested for talking about Jesus and stuff, and it says that like then the Spirit filled like Peter and John, and they said this, and they say something and they don't get arrested. And it's just like we're reading what Jesus literally promised them in Matthew 10. Jesus, like a lot of stuff's happened since then, but here we are in Acts chapter 4 and it's happening.
Yeah.
And so my thoughts on that would be like the thoughts of just preparing for those little moments. You don't have to try and think about every single possible little scenario that could be coming. You can be thinking about, of course, what's relevant to your life, like what is probably more likely to be tempting you or what more likely. You can think about those specifics, but if you wanted to look at how to cover all your bases as best you can, it's just, okay, how am I allowing the Spirit to move through me? Like, how actively am I in my faith? How actively am I building my relationship with Jesus? Do I know the Word well enough? Do I have a good community? And building those things around you will make sure that even if you aren't prepared for a very specific scenario that comes your way, you'll have the resources there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we can be. I think of like for whatever reason the parable of the sower. Sometimes, of like, the seed falls on different soils, and there's the seed. I think about this a lot. The seed that falls in the rocky soil, that doesn't have a good foundation. It sprouts up, but the moment like you have a hot day, like the first, like the sun's scorching, and because it's not firmly rooted, it immediately burns away. And you have the one seed that falls amongst the thorns, and because the weeds hadn't been plucked, it gets choked out, and it can't thrive. And so many of us are lazy as Christians.
Right.
We're lazy, and we think that, well, I got dunked that one day, and I went to VBS and I did the church thing here and there, like I'm good. I don't need to study my Bible regularly. I don't need to be in prayer. I don't need to be having godly conversations with other believers. I don't need to build up accountability. If that's you, when the sun rises and the heat is, when the heat comes, when you're put to the fire, you're gonna wilt.
Yeah.
Like, you're just gonna. There's a degree to which I don't even think this is a stretch. One of the biggest sacrifices of faith is the small decisions every day.
Yeah.
That's the difference maker between a mature Christian and a foolish Christian that is just like, I'll be fine. I don't need, like, you're not going to be fine. The devil's been at this a lot longer than you have. Like, you need to find your strength in something that is older and truer, and more powerful than the devil. It ain't you. It's not just gonna be you're not just gonna be able to white knuckle your way through the hard times. Yeah. You need a firm foundation. You need to pluck the weeds. You gotta put to death the stuff, as we talked about in the last episode. You have to be prepared, because it's not just gonna be perfect weather conditions every single day. Right? You can't be a fair weather Christian, because rarely do we have fair weather as Christians. When we're on the mountaintop, when things are going smoothly, that's time that God has given us to prepare for the hard time that is indeed coming.
Right.
And if you don't prepare, you're gonna give up. You're gonna fall. So that's my encouragement, as we kind of land the plane here. If you're someone that you're like, you know what, I'm content to be a fair weather Christian, and I don't want to put in the hard work. I don't want to put in the tedium of the day to day. Like, I'm telling you, you're gonna fall when the heat comes. Not if, when.
Right.
But if you want to stand firm, if you want to run the race with endurance, you've got to train for the race. I've used this example in a sermon before. Like, if I'm not a runner, I'm really not very in shape. If I went and ran a marathon right now, it doesn't matter how gung-ho I am at the start.
Right.
I can psych myself up. I can listen to all the motivational speeches I want. If I don't train for a marathon, it doesn't matter. I'm not making it to the end. And there's so many Christians that's where they're at, is they're running a race that they haven't trained for, and they're not trying to get ready for it. It's like, you've got to prepare. And it's not, flashy and cool maybe, but it's important. And, the big moments of in the scriptures, you have these big moments of like, wow, they really showed up. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these heroes of the faith. That didn't just happen.
Yeah.
They were prepared. They had prepared. God had been preparing them their whole life for that moment. And they had been mentally preparing their whole life for that moment. And it's because they did that now we can go back and read that story. One day we're going to stand before God, and he's going to hold us accountable for our life. Christian and non-Christian. When we stand before the great white throne of judgment, all of our life is going to be laid bare. And you have to ask yourself, when that day comes, do I want my whole life to be a record of compromises? Or do I want my life... You're going to have moments where you fail. But man, I want to hear, well done, my good and faithful servant. That takes work. So do not grow weary of doing good. Keep it up, keep going. And just like in every good story, in those moments where we feel weak, God gives us what we need to keep going. If we're faithful to him, he'll give us a friend and a mentor to talk to and shed tears with. He'll give you your Samwise Gamgee to help carry you up the rest of the mountain.
Right.
And often that's himself. So
yeah, what a loving God we have. That yes, we go through struggles, but it's like he's right there. Mm-hmm. He's right there with us through it. He doesn't abandon us.
Amen.
So yeah, that's gonna do it. That was all heat. I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you got something from it. Let us know in the comments if you did. Like, please let us know if there was something that you really loved. Let us know if you have any more questions. If you want certain topics to be covered by me and Cody, we'd be happy to hear from you.
Yeah.
But yeah, that'll do it for this one. We really appreciate you listening, and we'll see you in the next one.
Grace and peace.